So when I was in high school, I used to play sports. And one of the sports I played was football, varsity football. And when you play varsity sports, it's not uncommon, back in those days, newspapers, to get your name in a newspaper, right? And, they would list your stats, they would call them. How many times you ran with the ball, how far you got, how many points you made, how many yards you gained, all that good stuff. And I can remember at the beginning of each season, sitting with the rest of the team and our coaches warning us to never read the newspaper during the season. And Lord, have mercy on your soul if you did, and the coach found out, because he was not going to be merciful. And the reason for that is, if you read the newspaper, it's easy to slip into the temptation to find your name in the sports section and see what the sports writers had to say about you. And if it was good stuff, well, that led to an inflated ego, a big head, people thinking, boy, I'm pretty good. I'm better than the rest of those guys. Not only better, I'm great. I am the star. I am the team. And it only takes one or two people with those prideful, selfish attitudes to change the whole mindset of the entire team, because they're not the same anymore, right? There's a division now. And when they're divided, they don't play well. And if our coach saw this happening by some unrealistic and impossible test of endurance and toughness and fitness, he would make sure to bring to fruition that saying of Jesus, "Those who exalt themselves shall be humbled." And I've seen it. So I can tell you, those who exalt themselves, they are humbled, just like Jesus said. And I think in the gospel, Jesus is warning his disciples about the same thing, only he's using the scribes and the Pharisees of examples of what not to do. So the scribes and Pharisees, it says, did things to be seen. They were show-offs. And those phylacteries and tassels they wore, those weren't uncommon. Other people wore those. Theirs were just bigger and longer to make people look at them, to say, hey, look at me, look at what I'm wearing. And they loved to be given places of honor. And they loved to hear praises about themselves. And they loved to be treated better and ahead of everybody else. And that was the exact opposite of Jesus' servant leadership style. What he wanted for his disciples was unity and humility. So what is this humility? Well, humility is not thinking bad about ourselves. It's not thinking that I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not holy enough. It's not about being timid and insecure. It's not about having a bad image of ourselves. That is false humility. Because it's not really humility. We're still thinking selfish about ourselves. So humility is a challenge. It's a challenge to our pride. It's a challenge to our need to be noticed, recognized, and admired. Because when those needs creep into our life, sometimes without even knowing it, we set expectations of how we think other people should treat us based on those needs. And guess what? Nobody but we know what those expectations are. Because we don't tell anybody. Because if we did, they would say, you're crazy, you're out of your mind, that's totally unreasonable. So we have unknown, unreasonable expectations. And we can see the result of this even when we're doing something that seems like a service to other people. If we're doing it expecting to be noticed, recognized, and admired for doing it. Because those selfish expectations will not ever be met. And what happens when our expectations aren't met? We get upset, we get angry, we get resentful, we get judgmental, and eventually we become isolated. And either we isolate ourselves because we don't want to be with people that don't meet our expectations of how we think we should be treated, or other people isolate from us because they don't want to be wrapped up in our selfishness and all of our negativity. So Jesus knew. He knew that if his disciples were not humble, if they were like the scribes and the Pharisees, that they weren't going to make it. Their community was going to cease to exist because they wouldn't be the same anymore. There would be division. Eventually, they would be isolated from one another. And their mission would just kind of dissolve, and everything would be forgotten. So, they needed to be humble. So, as disciples here on this earth right now, us, carrying out the mission of Jesus, we need to be humble. We need to remember that we need each other. All of us need each other. If we're divided and isolated, we're just going to fail. We need to remember not to judge one another, but to admit our own mistakes, to listen, and to encourage one another. We need to remember to forget ourselves, to do things for others just because we love them, and not expect anything in return. We need to be humble. You know, at the end of a sports season in high school, when all the sports are done, there's usually a banquet, right? A sports banquet where awards are given out. And I remember being at one banquet, and our football coach got up, the same guy that could be unmerciful, and he gave a special award. And this award wasn't to the quarterback for throwing so many passes. It wasn't to the guy that caught them all. It wasn't to the guy that ran the farthest or the guy with the most tackles. It was to another guy who was kind of a quiet guy. He didn't play much, but he never missed a practice, never missed a game in 2 years of varsity football. And when he did show up, when he was there, he gave his complete effort. He gave everything he had. He never complained, never criticized, never quit. He was always standing there on the sideline, cheering on and encouraging his teammates. So our coach, when he noticed this, made sure to fulfill that other part of that saying of Jesus. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. So I've seen it. Those who humble themselves, they're exalted, just like Jesus said.